Wow, what a crazy time, right? Last week I wasn't able to be here. Now this week nobody's able to be here. Regardless of all that, I'm hoping next week we're meeting back together. But until then, I didn't want to be completely off this week and not have anything. So I'm going to record the lesson I would have been doing tonight. I'm recording it to give it to you guys now so you can watch it with your family or just have it, but that you can watch it by yourself. But that we're not completely missing this week and completely not connecting at all in any sort of way. So we're talking about what is Christianity, right? And that's kind of the question. And we go, well, if we want to know what Christianity is, if we want to know what Christian is, the first place we should look is the Bible, right? To define that. What is Christianity? Well, the Bible should be able to define that for us. But when we look at the Bible, and we talked about this 2 weeks ago, we find out that, Christianity is only mentioned like 3 times in the entire Bible, and it's never truly defined really well. The first time it's mentioned, and the time that we were looking at, is in Acts chapter 26, and it says this. It was in Antioch, which was the town where the church it was kind of one of their central hubs. It was in modern-day Turkey, north of Israel. It was one of the bigger places where Christianity kind of started from. It's where Paul actually went out on all of his missionary journeys, was from Antioch. So it was in Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians. So there we have it. That's it. That's all it says. It doesn't say, and Christian means. Now, it's clear that it was most likely a derogatory term that they used to kind of try to make fun of or poke fun at the first believers, the first Jesus followers. But that's what it says right there, right? It says the disciples were first called Christians. Now, is that talking about the 12 disciples, which would have been 11, but then 12, Carter and Barnabas? And then we can get into that, blah, 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 blah. But is it talking about those disciples, like Matthew and Peter and James, John, Andrew? Well, probably not, because at this point in Acts, they were actually being referred to as the apostles. And every time before this, when they talk about disciples, they're talking about all believers. All of the first century believers, all the people who believed in Jesus and believed in that message were disciples. So there we have it. And this is why that verse is really important. Because it's easy to claim yourself to be a Christian. Anybody can do it. And in fact, what makes it so easy is that you don't actually have to look very much like Jesus to be a Christian, because Christian isn't defined in the Bible. We can make it up. We can be a Christian and not love people. We can be a Christian and not look anything at all like Jesus. And in fact, we can take bunches of verses out of context, one at a time, boom, 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 piece this together and make our own definition of what Jesus would have wanted and what Christianity looks like. But a disciple, a Jesus follower, that's a little bit harder to change the definition of, because it is defined very clearly. And in fact, Jesus dives into that very, very clearly when he was here on earth. And so that's what we've been doing. We've been looking at what is called the Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And it's called the Sermon on the Mount. And some people believe that this was one big sermon that Jesus gave and that Matthew decided to write down. But here's what I believe. I believe this is the same thing that Jesus would basically say every time he spoke. When there were large crowds gathered around, I feel like this is what Jesus would talk about. He would go through this. He would kind of go through all these things. And when Jesus had died and he came back to life and the disciples had gone out to preach to other people, Matthew was sitting there and he goes, I should write this down. And so when he did, he wrote, and he got to Matthew chapter 5, because, they were chaptering it and versing it back then. They weren't, secret. Okay. But he's writing it and he goes, I remember what Jesus would always say every time he would preach, because Matthew heard it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so he goes, I'm going to write that down. And that's what I think Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7 is. And that's why I think it's so important, because this is what Jesus thought was so important. This is what Jesus decided, hey, I'm going to preach this over and over and over until you get it. This is important. So we go, okay, well, what does Jesus have to say? And what we quickly pick up on is that Jesus does not view things the same way most of us view things. He doesn't see the world the way the world sees the world. And in fact, out of the gate, Jesus says something incredibly strange and crazy and just, wait, is this really real kind of stuff? This is what he says. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, it says this, "And when he saw the crowd gather, he began to preach, and he said, 'Blessed are you who are poor.'" And all the poor people that were there were like, "Are we? I don't feel that blessed. Like, are we about to be blessed? Are you about to give us some money? Is this like one of those chain emails where if I just pass this along or I forward this to other people that I will get money in the mail tomorrow? Like, I don't feel very blessed, Jesus. If this is what blessed feels like, I don't want to be blessed. I want to be rich, or I at least want to have food. I want to have a house. I want to be able to pay my bills. Jesus, that's great and wonderful and all. But if this is it, if this is what blessed is, I would rather be a little bit more wealthy. That's it. I don't need a mansion. I just need like enough to live on. That's all I'm asking. But Jesus goes on. He goes, that's not it. He goes, blessed are, those who are hungry and thirst for righteousness. But here's some of my favorites. Blessed are those who are persecuted. You're like, really? Because I don't feel very blessed when I'm persecuted. That doesn't feel good. I don't like that. And Jesus goes, oh yeah? How about this one? Consider it joy when people hate you. And you're like, no, I don't feel that way. I don't like that, Jesus. He goes, when people lie about you, that's great. And what? He's like, you should be happy about that because there's rewards for you in heaven. And they're like, but what about here? That would be nice too. But that's what Jesus said, and he flips everything completely upside down. He goes, you think the rewards, you think what matters is here on earth, but I promise you, it is so much better where you're going to end up. And that is so much more important than what's going on here. But then Jesus also says these other crazy things, like, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, if someone wants to slap you right here on the right side of your cheek, whoosh, turn to the other cheek. Well, bam, let them hit the other side. To which, again, you would go, wait, what? I don't think so. He goes, if someone wants your shirt, give them your coat too. Give them everything. Give them all. If they want you to carry something for you a mile, carry it 2 miles. Go above and beyond what people are screwing you over to get. And you would be like, what? No, Jesus, that sounds like the opposite of what you should say. Like an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. That seems fair. That is fair. I like that. If someone hits me, I get to hit them back. If someone steals from me, I can steal from them. If someone does something bad to me, it's okay for me to do something bad for them. That is called balance. That is called fair. I like that. That makes sense, Jesus. Jesus goes, no, that's not how we live. That's not what the kingdom of God is about. He goes, you should let them, and in fact, be joyful. Give to them when they're trying to take from you. They hate you, love them anyway. They want to take your stuff, give it to them freely. They want to do, and you're just like, but Jesus, I don't know if I want to do that. He goes, how about this one? Don't hate your enemies. You've heard it said, love your friends and hate your enemies. And I say, love your enemies too. And you're like, okay, well, I can love my enemies, I guess. He goes, pray for them. You're like, okay, but you mean pray that they go to hell, right? Pray that they spend eternity burning in an eternal blaze of fire, right? That's what you mean about my enemies, about the people who hate me and that I don't really care too much for either, right? That's what you mean by pray for them? Jesus is like, no. Pray for them to be blessed. Pray for blessings for them. To which they would have been like, but why, Jesus? That sounds like the opposite of what we'd want to do. But Jesus didn't just say the words, Jesus lived the words out of the gate. So as soon as Matthew chapter 7 is over, it begins with Matthew chapter 8. And Jesus is sitting there, he goes, you should care for those who are persecuted. You should care for the outcasts. Love those who are mistreated. Love those who are outside of the popular bubble, the ones that are easy to love. Love those who aren't easy to love. And then instantly, he gets done preaching. He walks down the side of the hill and he starts heading to Capernaum. And as he's leaving that crowd, they're all still there following him. A leper comes running up, which you don't touch lepers. You don't look at lepers. You stay far away from lepers because they're sick. And you don't want the sickness that they have because at that time it was an incurable disease. And he runs up to him and everyone goes, they take a step back, right? Like, they're like, oh, no, don't touch me. You know, like, I don't want to get sick. No leprosy, please stay away. And he goes, Jesus, I know if you want to, you could heal me. And I imagine Jesus turns to the crowd and he smiles at him. And he turns back to him. He goes, oh, buddy, I want to. And then he does something that's absolutely insane, right? Because we know that Jesus is very powerful. In the very next story that I'm about to tell after this, Jesus actually heals someone from hundreds of maybe thousands of miles away just by thinking a thought. He doesn't even have to say the words. He just thought the thought. And here he goes, oh, I want to. But instead of just healing him like that, just thinking healing it, saying healing it, he reaches down and he touches him to heal him. To which everyone have been like, oh, like, that's not good. You don't do that. But Jesus goes, you should love and care for those who are hard to love and care about. Whether it's their fault or not, love those people anyway. And then a Roman centurion comes up, a Roman leader, an army leader, the most hated person in Israel, the person who could be the most hated Israel. Like, it was okay. It made sense because the Romans were the ones who were invading. The Romans were the ones who had taken them in captivity, who had stolen their friends and family to be slaves, the one who were forcing them to pay taxes, the ones who were trying to infiltrate their religious beliefs with idol worship. They were the ones that were okay to be hated. If there was anyone that God should have been okay with hating, it was the Romans. And he comes up to Jesus. He goes, my servant is very sick, and I know that you can heal him. And I'm sure Jesus turns around to the crowd, and he's like, okay, yeah, I can heal him, and I will. Where's he at? Show me the way. Let's go to your house. And the Roman centurion goes, no, Jesus, no. I'm not worthy of you coming to my house. To which everyone in that crowd would have been like, duh, we all know that. That was obvious. That's the obvious thing. Ding, ding, ding. Someone here is thinking straight. It's not Jesus. It's the Roman. How weird is that? But Jesus goes, oh, okay. He goes, because the Roman centurion goes, I'm not worthy for you to come into my home. Instead, I know that if you just say the words from here, he could be healed. And this time the Bible specifically says he did look at the crowd. And he looks out at the crowd that were there with him and he goes, let me tell you guys something. I haven't seen faith like what this man has here in all of Israel. To which they would have been like, we're part of Israel, Jesus. You're saying that this Roman has more faith than us? Jesus goes, yeah, I am. And he goes, he's already healed, bud. It's taken care of. You know, like, boom, pound it, like, head on back, have a great day. And it says, in that hour, the servant was healed. Jesus lived out what he was saying in such a way that it was impossible to ignore what Jesus was trying to say. And so today's story, we're going to look at it's the love of me and how, like, that Jesus goes, it's not about you. It's not about you. And that's what he says, starting in Matthew chapter 6, as you go into the Sermon on the Mount, he says this, don't do good deeds publicly to be admired, because then you will lose your reward from your Father in heaven. To which we might go, but what's wrong with that, Jesus? Why can't we do that? Why can't we be that way? Why can't I just get recognized for doing good things? What's wrong with being recognized for doing good things? In fact, you might sit there and go, Jesus, it's going to help you if they know that I do good things because of you, right? Like you're like, this is how you further your message. People like it when people do good things. And they will probably see me do good things and be like, oh, why do you do good things? And I can be like, because Jesus. And they'll be like, how cool. I want Jesus. And boom, bam. All right. It's perfect, Jesus. It's a good thing. Jesus goes, no. In fact, he goes, if you do it in publicly like the religious leaders do, you throw out the pomp and circumstance and gather all the glory and everyone's, oh, look how great they are. He goes, there's your reward, and that's it. That's the only reward you're going to get. He goes, no, instead, in verse 3, he says, when you give to someone, don't even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. When you give gifts in secret, your Father, who knows all secrets, will reward you. Then he goes on, he goes, now when you pray, don't pray in a way that makes everyone go, oh, look how great he is. He's like, don't pray where you're like, oh, Father, look at me. And you're like dropping down in front of people and they're all like gathering around going like, oh my gosh, he's praying. How great is that? He goes, no, don't pray like that. He goes, instead, go pray by yourself in private without anyone knowing what's going on. When you're fasting, he goes, don't do it in such a way that it looks like, oh, look how hungry I am. Look how much I'm sacrificing for this fast. He goes, no, do it in your own time, in your own place, in your own way to draw yourself closer to God. But then he goes on to start talking about money. And he says, he's like, don't store your treasures up here on earth. Do it in heaven where they're eternal and all this stuff. And in verse 21 of chapter 6, he says this, wherever your treasure is, there your heart and your thoughts will also be. For your eye is the lamp of your body. A pure eye lets sunlight into your soul, but an evil eye shuts out the light and plunges you into darkness. If the light that you think you have is really darkness, how deep that darkness will be. For no one can serve two masters. You will either hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And I would even say this, you cannot serve both God and yourself. You can't do it. You can't serve you and God at the same time. Because that's what he's saying. He goes, where your focus is, where your love is where your heart and your thoughts are also going to be. If your focus, if your love, if the whole point of why you're doing this is focused on you, then that, my friend, is all you're going to get. Then he goes on, I'm going to jump ahead in chapter 7. He starts talking about why we shouldn't judge others and to worry about don't worry about the speck in their eye when we got a plank in our own eye, that we need to take care of our struggles, our ordeal before we start calling other people out. Because again, it's not there. You're like, but that's the opposite. I shouldn't be caring about myself. I should care about others, right, Jesus? That's not what he's saying. He goes, no. When you're trying to take care of somebody else, you're doing it because you're trying to look good. You're trying to ignore what you've got going on and trying to be like, hey guys, look how great I am. I'm here to tell you how wrong you are. Jesus goes, no. Take care of yourself. Take care of your own problems. Let me take care of them. But then he goes on and he says this, and this is one of those things that's really, really difficult. After giving them a warning of what false teachers look like, those who are caring more about themselves than anyone else, he goes, this is what they look like. They're hard to identify, but you will see them because they look good, but they're not. Then he says this, not all people who sound religious are really godly. This is chapter 7, verse 21. They may refer to me as Lord, but they still won't enter the kingdom of heaven. The decisive issue is whether they obey my Father in heaven. On Judgment Day, many will tell me, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name, and we cast out demons in your name, and performed many miracles in your name. But I will reply, I never knew you. Go away. The things you did were unauthorized. I like that. Like there's some sort of like authorization, like you got to get, some sort of paperwork done for it now. But the point is this, he goes, you can say you're doing things because of me and not be doing things because of me. And that's that point. That's that little thing that he said back in chapter 6. He goes, the lamp is like your eyes, like the lamp to your body. It lets sunlight in, but if you're doing evil things, if your eye is evil, it only lets in darkness. He goes, if you are loving and focused completely on yourself and not on me and not on what I desire, not on what God desires, then I promise you, you're in darkness. You're not in light. But he goes, how Deep is the darkness of those who think that they're light, but they're not. And that's where we are. And that's what I want us to understand. And that's what I want you to understand. It's not about me. It's about God. Oh, such a cliche thing to say, but that's the way it is. That's the absolute truth. It's not about me, it's about God. And when we're focused on us, when we're putting all the glory on what we're getting from what we're doing, it's not about us. It's not about God anymore, it's about us. Because we're raking that in, we're doing it for our sake. And that's what Jesus says. They think they're in the light, but they're in the darkness, which is the deepest and darkest of darkness. Because they don't know they're there. He goes, and those are the people who come to me and say, Lord, Lord, I did all of these great things. He goes, no, you did them for you. You did not do them in my name. You did them with my name. But you did them for you. And so there's two stories I want to point out where Jesus kind of brings us to light. And so the first one is in Matthew chapter 23, and he's pulling out all the problems that he has with the Pharisees. And it's not that he hates the Pharisees. It feels like he does. But to Jesus, he's like, you are the ones who should get it. You're the ones who I shouldn't have to explain this to. But you're the ones who are the furthest away from what I'm actually telling you to be like. And this is actually during the last week of his life. He's there in Jerusalem, and he's talking near the temple. He knows he's going to be dying in a couple days, and he starts saying things like this. I'm picking up in chapter 23, verse 20. It says, how terrible it will be for you teachers of religious law and you Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest part of your income, but you ignore the important things of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. So he's like, you're willing to do the obvious things, the things that bring glory to you, the things that you look good, that make you look religious, but you ignore the things that aren't easy to find, the things that don't boast your goodness to others. You ignore those things, which honestly, to me, is more important. He goes, you should tithe, yes, but you should not leave undone the more important things. Then he goes, how terrible it would be for you teachers of religious law and you Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are so careful to clean the outside of your cup and the dish, but the inside of you is filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence and honestly selfishness. Blind Pharisees, first wash the inside of your cup, then the outside will become clean. How terrible it will be for you teachers of religious law and you Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but filled on the inside with dead bones and all sorts of impurity. You try to look like upright people outwardly, but inside your hearts are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. And there's so many people who claim to be Christians that don't look very much like Jesus, that don't look very much like Jesus' followers, and look a lot like that. Right? They come to church and they do all the godly things. They go because they're supposed to. They go to youth group on Wednesday nights. They go to the Bible study. They carry their Bible with them at school. They wear the godly t-shirts. But when they're not on display for the world to see, there's not very much God going on in their lives. Don't be like that. Get away from that. Because that's easy. It's easy to be Christian, but that's not Jesus follower. That's not what Jesus has called us to be. Let's take a look, though, at someone different, a different aspect of this. Because some of us would be like, well, I'm not like that. Okay, well, good, I hope. But look at this. So in Matthew chapter 16, we're scooting backwards a little bit in Matthew. But he enters into Capernaum again because he's going back and forth to all these cities. And when he enters in, he pulls the disciples aside and he says this, picking up in chapter 16, verse 13. Who do you people say that I am? Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Well, the disciples replied, some say you're John the Baptist, and some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. And he goes, okay, good. But who do you say that I am? It says, then Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because your Father in heaven revealed this to you. You did not learn this from a human being. And I love that. And I love what he says there. He goes, he's like, he's like, who do people say I am? They're like, oh, this thing. He goes, but who do you think I am? And Simon's like, I got this one, boys. You're God. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of God. And Jesus is like, yes! Nailed it, Simon. Yeah, finally. We've been at this for 3 years, but you're finally getting it. Nailed it. Nicely done. You're on the right page. In fact, he goes on to say, I am going to build the foundation of my church on you, Simon. You nailed it. You're rocking it. You're the best, buddy. Awesome. And that's what we all would want, right? Like if we were doing something godly and Jesus just like appeared in front of us and everyone else around us and was like, nailing it. You're awesome. You're doing everything right. You are so great. You look great. You're awesome. I love you. You're being the best. So good here. I couldn't have done it better myself. And I'm Jesus. So like, great. And so like, wow, like that would be amazing, right? Like Jesus literally just does that to Simon. Like you think, okay, he's on point. He is ready to rock and roll. He's doing this absolutely right. And so then Jesus, as soon as he's done with that, he high fives him. Everyone's excited and they're all cheering like, yeah, go Simon Peter, you're awesome. Anyway, he quiets the crowd, the disciples down. He goes, okay, but we got some important stuff we need to discuss. He goes, so when we get to Jerusalem here in a little bit, I'm going to be arrested and I'm going to be killed. They're going to kill me. But don't worry. It's not going to end there. That's not how this thing ends. And so he gets done talking to him about that, and Simon pulls him aside. He grabs him by the shoulder and he pulls him aside. And this is what he says. Peter took Jesus aside and he corrected him. Corrected Jesus. Man, you think it went to his head a little bit that he's like, okay, I'm Jesus. Like he's so proud of me that like, let me tell you where you're actually wrong, Jesus, because like I'm actually pretty on fire right now. So, okay. He goes, heaven forbid, Lord, he said. This will never happen to you. So basically he's like, nah, Jesus, don't worry. I've got your back, bro. Like, I got this. We ain't gonna let nobody touch you. You ain't dying. We gonna do this. We're gonna rise to power. We're taking the Romans out. We're gonna rule Israel. And Jesus goes, you know what, Peter? Gosh, you're right. You're right. I know you guys. You got my back. We got this. We're gonna do this. I ain't gonna die. No, of course that's not what Jesus said. This is actually what Jesus said. Jesus turned to Peter and he said, get away from me, Satan. Could you imagine, you got your arm around Jesus and he just kind of brushes you off and he's like, get away from me. And you're like, whoa, Satan. Woo, okay, what did I just do? We were high-fiving a minute ago. What happened? And Jesus goes, you are a dangerous trap to me, for you see things merely from a human point of view, not from God's view. But then he says this to the rest of the disciples. He goes, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must put aside your selfish ambition. You must put aside your love for yourself. You must put aside that love of me. You must put aside your selfish ambition, shoulder your cross, and follow me. If you try to keep your life, if you try to keep the love of me kind of mentality, the doing it for me kind of thing, you will lose it. You will lose your life. But if you give up your life for me, if you totally surrender to me, you will find true life. And how do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul in the process? Is anything worth more than your soul? How do you benefit if you do all these good things for yourself to make yourself feel good and look good, that the world looks at you as if you're the greatest individual, but you lose yourself, your soul in the process? Because this is what it's about. You have to love others above yourself. In fact, this reminds me of a verse in John chapter 15. So he's about to die here in John chapter 15. This is literally the night before. They've done the Lord's Supper. He's going to the garden. He's going to be arrested. In literally 12 hours, he's probably going to be dead. And so he turns to the disciples and he's like, I need to tell you guys these really important things. And so in verse 12 of chapter 15, he goes, I command you to love each other in the same way that I love you. And here's how you measure it, which is so awesome because so often Jesus doesn't make it so clear. Most of the time it's almost like a riddle that Jesus is like, this is what you need to do. And you're like, well, how do you do that? And he's like, that's the riddle. But in this scenario, he doesn't do that. He goes, you need to love each other in the same way that I love you. And here's how you measure it. Here's how you do it. Here's how you know if you're following the law along with what I'm saying. Here's how you measure it. The greatest love is shown when people lay down their lives for their friends. So you want to know if you're loving others like I'm loving you? Are you laying down your life for others? Are you sacrificing yourself for other people? Are you putting other people completely and totally first in your life? Now, here's the deal when it comes to sacrificial loving, okay? When it loving like Jesus does, like what he's talking about here. Love isn't sacrificing your wants for someone else. It's not saying, man, this would be really beneficial to me, but you know what? Jesus says that I shouldn't care about me and I should care about them. It's not about making your life miserable so that somebody else's life isn't. That's not what it's about. That's not the point. Now, sometimes it might feel that way, or sometimes you might have to do some things that look that way. Jesus literally had to die on a cross. But if your entire life is nothing but just absolute pain for you because you're so sacrificial of yourself, that's not what Jesus wants. That's not what he's saying. But this is what it is. Love is when your wants are wanting others to get their wants. That's what it's about. It's not giving your wants away so that other people can have their wants and you're just left miserable. It's when your joy, your happiness, the thing that you want, that makes your life worth living, is seeing other people get their wants. That's what it's about. So here's your challenge. I want you to think of something. I want you to even pray about, to ask God to reveal something, to show you something that you could do for someone else that not only doesn't benefit you, but actually forces you to go outside your comfort zone. It was something that you would never normally do, that would make you feel so uncomfortable to do. I want you to pray that prayer. It's a very dangerous prayer because, it's uncomfortable. But so is following Jesus. Anyone can be a Christian. And being a Christian can be very, very comfortable. Being a Jesus follower, not always. But the reward at the end, the reward even in the moment, is still so much greater and so much sweeter when we live that way and we live this way. Let's pray. Father God, just thank you for this time to just be together even from a distance, Lord. It's weird and this stuff is hard right now. I just pray that we remember that you are in all of this and you are in control of all of this. And there's nothing that we need to be worried or afraid of because you got this. You're more powerful than this. God, I pray that you show us your power over all things through this. But God, I even want to ask that you reveal to us ways that we can be who you call us to be, that we can love in the way that you want us to love. And God, I pray more than anything that our lives look the way that your life looked. That when people see us, they don't see us anymore, but instead they can't help but see the radiant love that is just pouring out of us into their lives, to where they look at us and they go, there's something different. I need to have what they have because it's so good. God, let our lives be so focused and full of your love that we can't help but overflow your love into other people, God. We pray all this in your name. Amen.